So this section, we're going to really get into the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. I want to warn you that this section is going to be a little bit longer, but one of the advantages of doing this on the web is that you have control of your own learning. So if it gets long for you, you can pause at any point in time and take a break or take some time to go back and reflect on what you just heard. Because I agree that this section of the training is a little bit denser, but in order to do it so that it doesn't get too broken up, it's probably best that we do it as a whole. So we're going to get into present levels. You know, in the past, it was so much easier because those of us in special ed for a long time have been referring to this as the PLOPs, the present levels of performance. But in the last reauthorization of IDEA, they made it a lot longer. It's now the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, which we've started to refer to as PLAPs. But for our purposes, I think I'm just going to try to use the term present levels. If we look in IDEA, we find that present levels must be a statement of the child's present level of both academic and functional. Now this functional piece was new, and it refers to the social emotional development of a child. So we need to look at both academic and functional performance, and it has to be the present level, but also including a statement on how the disability affects the child's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. For preschool children, this would mean how the disability affects the child's participation in appropriate activities. So looking at our present level statements, it's really about defining areas of special education services by first conducting an analysis to determine the gap between grade level expectations and current skill knowledge, and then determining how the disability affects participation in the general curriculum. So we're going to look at these aspects more closely. Here's another way of diagramming the development of present level statements. You see we have the general curriculum expectations compared to the current skills and knowledge. That leads to the identification of areas of instructional need, and then that leads to the statements that we're actually going to put on the IEP form. I like to think that the present levels is a conversation that takes place, and it's better to collect a lot of data sort of on the side and maybe even have a separate flip chart page or a separate note page, and then we go to determining what we're going to put on the form itself. Different states have different forms. Different districts have different forms. And so how you put the statements ultimately on the form will be dependent on what your form looks like. Sometimes an IEP form will have a space for one single comprehensive statement. So you can put everything together in sort of a paragraph form. I actually prefer that. But then there are others where they ask you for a present level for each of the goal areas that you're going to be writing for the child, or each area of concern. So again, in order to make this really a good planning process, that's why I suggest doing the present levels over on the side on a sheet of paper as notes, and then coming back and figuring out the best way to put it on the form. Address the process first and your form second. So getting started with the conversation on present levels. The first thing you want to do, whether it's informally or formally, is you want to gather some information. You want to be asking yourself or making certain that your team knows, first of all, what do the state or district standards really expect? What do they mean? Make sure that the team, including the parent, really understands what the expectations are from those standards. The second one is what is expected in the general ed classroom. Hopefully it's the same in terms of the general focus or content, but there might be some expectations around how students are expected to show what they learn, or the classroom behavior. There are going to be some additional expectations in the regular classroom, so you need to bring that to the conversation as well. Another question that you want to be looking at and asking yourself is, what kinds of instructional strategies or approaches are being used in that general classroom? Because that helps to set those expectations. What are the social emotional expectations? And then something I think we tend to overlook and forget is this thing called extracurricular. We want to know, what are the extracurricular activities or events that are part of a school life for the students at this grade level. All of this is just gathering background information about making sure you really understand all of the expectations and considerations in the general curriculum that is driven from or based on those state standards. Where can you find these materials? You want to collect the materials. Where can you find the answers to all those questions we just talked about? You might look at course outlines. You might look at teacher descriptions of what they're expecting to cover and include over the year. Curriculum guides that teachers have is another good source. Textbooks might be used. You want to look at the current assessments that are being used, both in the classroom as well as in the statewide assessments. You want to look at the extracurricular offerings and expectations for participation. You also want to make sure that you're looking at the whole child. We have a tendency to think, well, this student was qualified based on their need for reading. And so therefore, we're only going to look at reading. And in reality, we need to make sure that we're not just thinking about why a student qualified for special education and what disability they have, but what are their full needs? Because there might be some areas that pop up that the child will need additional instruction on that did not necessarily show up in the evaluation. So you want to look at the academic, social, emotional, communication. And when we talk about communication, it's really important here to think about language, particularly for second language students, as well as for students who may have a hearing loss or who may be deaf, who have unique communication needs. So communication and language development is a very important part of looking at the whole child. Recreation and leisure, and looking at what the parents and the family have to say about what does a student do for recreation, what does a student do on their own time. That's additional information to bring to the table. We want to make sure that we look at some of the health and physical needs or medical needs, and this would include hearing and vision information. The hearing and vision screenings are really critical piece of information to bring to the table. Let's not forget technology, particularly in this day when our emphasis on the use of assistive technology. Has the student used technology in the past? Is there a potential need that the student may have relative to technology? And finally, for those secondary students entering at age 16 or older, we want to make sure that we're also thinking about jobs and job training, the post-secondary education, community participation, and home independent living.